Good evening, everyone. We are live with episode number 25 of Material Issues. It's good to see everybody. I'm Mark Hershberger of Pop Detective Records. And as always, I'm joined by my very good friend, Mr. David Bash of the International Pop Overthrow Festival, back on track in late 2021. David, how the heck are you?
I'm doing okay, Mark.
Yeah.
I'm, as people who've been reading my Facebook page know, I've been going through a little bit of a meds adjustment. We'll just leave it at that. And I've been feeling very fuzzy lately. It may take a few days or even a week or two to reorient myself. So if for some reason I'm not too with it during this show, or I'm searching for some fact and can't find it, I beg your forgiveness in advance. But hopefully
Well,
it'll all be okay.
we hope you feel better quickly. We
Thank
hope
you.
it's like a reorient express.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I want to wean myself off of this stuff, and
Yeah.
I'm almost there. So
Yeah.
I think
Good.
it's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
Otherwise, obviously IPO's coming up in a little more than a week. We've got IPO New York at Arlene's Grocery. The following week, we have IPO in Boston at Flying Embers, a new venue.
Nice.
And also a new venue the week after in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, at the Casbah.
Oh,
so
nice.
Yeah, we're looking forward to all of that. I know it's going to be a lot of fun.
When does IPO New York start? Is that on a Thursday, Friday?
Starts on a Friday.
Starts on a Friday.
Friday, November 12th.
All right.
Through Sunday, November 14th. It's kind of compact. We've got afternoon shows on both the Saturday and Sunday.
Good.
Evening shows on Friday and Saturday. So 4 shows, 15 bands, but the creme de la creme, let me tell you.
Right. Very good. Nice. Well, hopefully everybody tells their friends and comes out on a nice weekend in New York City at an iconic venue, Arlene's Grocery.
It really is. It's so great to be back there. We were there from 01 through 04, and we've missed it, but here we are, and I think it's gonna be great.
And think about it. Not only can they go to an iconic venue and see some fantastic creme de la creme bands, but they're right down the street from Katz's Delicatessen, and you're talking the best corned beef and whatnot sandwiches. So what more do you want?
You can bet I'm going to be a frequent visitor. Rena's coming in with me, so we'll both be there quite often. I mean, the turkey sandwiches, it's like no other.
It's not, and you can't move for about 4 hours if you even eat a half of one. It's so big. Yeah, it's really good. But great. If I can make it up, I'm definitely going to try. Of course, my situation with my new foster doggy and things. So if Hannah's around and can watch them, I will definitely hop the train and be up.
Sure hope so. And during the course of that time, I hope to come down and visit as well.
That'd be awesome. Awesome.
We'll
we lament the fact that we can't go to Vintage Vinyl in New Brunswick anymore. Rest in peace, Vintage Vinyl.
We'll find some others.
We'll find some others. It's all good.
But, yes, but for now, we've got a great show in store, and
we do.
It's certainly my pleasure to introduce this gentleman. He and I have been good friends since 1995. I met him at a dear departed venue in Los Angeles called Alligator Lounge. And at that time, he was a wide-eyed 25-year-old would-be soft pop king. Big fan of the genre. Even then, he knew quite a bit for somebody that age, but people like me and Elliot Kendall and many others turned him on to stuff. And from there, he co-formed, I guess, a really cool soft pop band called the Now People, who have an album out that I think is really one of the exemplars of the modern version of that genre. And he also has become a label mogul. Leading to that, he worked with the great reissue label Revola and produced several releases. Mostly stuff that people wanted to see out, but bigger labels wouldn't touch. and Steve did the work and made it happen. And then he put together his own label, Now Sounds, which is reissued even better stuff because he's been in total control of everything. And he goes to painstaking efforts to make sure that they are spectacular. He's also a graphic artist, worked on several releases for Rhino, Warner Brothers, lots of other labels, does the artwork for IPO, the CDs, program covers, posters, everything. He's a jack of all trades, a great guy, a great one guy. Would you please give a huge welcome to Mr. Steve Stanley?
And there he
Hello.
is.
Yeah.
Nice.
Hey, Steve, David, that
Good to see you,
introduction.
Steve.
I don't even need to do this interview. You've covered all the bases, you know.
And have a good night, everybody.
Yeah, my intros do tend to be a bit wordy, don't they?
No,
It's
it's
both.
beautiful. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, David has some experience with intros, so we let him
Yeah.
do it. It's great. Yeah.
I think I know the answer to this, but I'm not sure. Where did one guy come from? Was that something you and Elliot Kendall just sort of?
You know, the origin of a lot of language among my friends is what we refer to as jive, and not jive in the traditional sense, but power jive. And a lot of that lingo comes from Elliot Kendall, and a great friend of mine. Known him for about as long as I've known you, David. Mid-90s, I think I met him. So great guy. That's where one guy comes from. Yeah.
And one guy, of course, has been expanded to however many guys we're talking about, like 3 guys going to lunch.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. One guy found
Elliot and I worked. Yeah. When Elliot and I worked together at Delphi Records, you know, our desks were next to each other. We had our own language. It got to the point where nobody else in the office could figure out what we were saying. So it sort of helped us navigate through the madness of that environment over there, which was great in a lot of ways and kind of crazy in a lot of ways too. So.
Now you came to all the things that you've done, and again, it's just a huge resume. But you came from a childhood that one would not expect would lead you to the life that you've lived. Weren't you raised for your first 10 years or so in a small town in Oklahoma?
Well, you got the state right. However, the city is the biggest. Actually, land mass wise, it's one of the biggest cities in the country. Oklahoma City is where I spent my first 10 years. And I grew up in my grandparents' house and was sort of completely surrounded by their life and experiences and their music. And so I grew up hearing, like a lot of big band. My grandfather loved Spike Jones and Glenn Miller and Tommy Dorsey, and just was really, it was kind of great to be able to sort of learn that music through his perspective,
Wow.
being, in the war and whatnot. And also my mother, she had a pretty remarkable record collection. I think sometime in the 60s, she was a member of the Columbia Record Club. So we had,
we all.
Yeah, but I think she might have gotten in trouble or something. I think she might have. I don't know what happened. But the result was we had all these records around the house. It Sonny and Cher, and the Rascals and Beatles and Elvis, and so it's kind of weird because I was an only child, and I spent a lot of time alone. I kind of had a weird upbringing that was very insular and very of another time. So I think that's the origin of why so much of my interest in music tends to be from an archival perspective.
Did they play a lot of music in the household all the time? Were these records and things being played? Were you exposed to this music a lot, or were you sitting down listening to these things?
Initially, my grandfather had this really beautiful old Zenith hi-fi in the den that he did all the wood paneling for. The mailman would come by every day and help him out with a few of the panels, and then after a few months we had a whole paneled, den, and the hi-fi, the Zenith, was always spinning. A lot of Spike Jones, stuff that he loved, but he would also let me play a lot of stuff that I liked and stuff that my mother had already had. And for some reason, she, in a concentrated period of time in the 60s, she acquired a lot of records.
Wow.
So, and then at age 10, you came out to LA. What brought you out here? A car, not a car or a plane.
Should I ignore should we go into the sad stuff? We can talk about the sad stuff, or my grandmother died, and my grandfather just couldn't. He didn't want to stay in that house. He wanted to sort of start a new life. It was just too many memories. So my aunt, who was an angel, she offered to let us come out to California and sort of start over, and it was a difficult decision to make, but it was probably the best one at that time of my life. So we came out to California, and it was just so unbelievable. It's hard to explain to people that are from somewhere else, totally different than Los Angeles, what it's like to see Hollywood for the first time. It's so incredibly exciting. We were driving around, and I would see like the carcass of the old brown derby, and the Hollywood Bowl. It was so exciting to come out here at that time.
I can imagine. Now, had you been playing an instrument at this point? Did that come a little bit later?
Yeah, actually, believe it or not, my first instrument was the drum set. I got a drum kit when I was 4 years old, and I don't think it made it to 4.5. I think I tore it apart completely. So sadly, that instrument didn't stick around very long. And then a few years later, I got my first guitar. And, one of the things about growing up in Oklahoma, you probably know this, is that everybody is obsessed with football. That's all that anybody cares about there. So all I wanted to do was listen to music and play guitar. So that's what I did.
How do you think that happened? What do you think it was because of the strong musical influence from your grandfather and your mom, or were you just not really much of an athlete? What was it?
I don't know. It was just, I guess I was sort of just listening to my own muse or interests. It was just Boomer Sooner 24/7 in Oklahoma City, and I just could not care less. I did like baseball. In fact, I did play baseball for the Putnam Heights Panthers.
Yeah. Where's my Putnam Heights T-shirt? Wait,
I still actually have my Putnam Heights Panthers shirt.
You need to make a set of Putnam High baseball cards, because I would buy them.
I want to reproduce the shirt, but obviously it's like about this big. I'd like to have it my size, but then I became a pitcher, and then when I was like about 8 years old, I threw a ball and got hit really, really hard. I got a concussion. Actually, it was. You're not as bad as I remember it, but I had to go. I think I went to the hospital for a little while, and so that sort of retired my career from baseball.
You're the Herb Score of soft pop. I don't know if you know who that is, but look him up. You'll see
Herb Score, yeah. Well, it's interesting, David. We've talked to a number of guests that, for whatever reason, were not into the sport of their town. Like Euro football or whatnot, and for whatever reason, inside up here, it was the music that just lit the light bulb. And you don't know why it is, but sometimes it hits you, and that's the path you go, and we're all better for it.
When was your first band, Steve?
First band was in the mid '80s, actually. It was a group called Groucho and the Marxists. Seriously, that was our name.
I love that.
And we had a song.
I want that T-shirt too.
We had a song called Nancy Reagan Takes Quaaludes, and another song called Pretoria, which was sort of anti-apartheid song, which was very topical for that time. And we played a couple shows. These guys were really cool. They were great guys. And we played Bebop Records in Reseda, which was a record store. You would have loved this store, David, and Mark as well. You guys both would have loved it. It was a performance venue, but it was also a record store. And it was right across the street from the Canyon Club, the country club, which was like a heavy metal venue at that time.
Yeah.
And they would have everybody, like Jane's Addiction used to play there before they were famous. and Henry Rollins would do spoken word events there. Let's see who else. 3D Picnic played there. My Dad Is Dead, band, like sort of like SST bands from the 80s, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's where we played our second show, actually. Our first show was at the Laza Club, which was Jean-Pierre's club in Hollywood, which was an all ages club, and it was kind of a performance venue more than just specifically a music venue. So they would have like spoken word and poetry, and like Angela Bowie would perform there. And
wow.
I think Willie Aaron's band played there way back then, and like just really amazing venue that is very loved and missed in this town. This was before you got here, David.
Yeah, no, I'm unfamiliar. Yeah.
So we played our last gig at the Whiskey A Go Go, and that was it for that band. And then I joined a sort of a psychobilly meets the Clash kind of a group called the Acetones. And they were a really, really great band. Actually, Dave Sobel went on to Jacob Dylan's band, the Freewheelers, afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. That was Jacob Dylan, right?
Yeah.
And he was a great keyboardist. Actually, just saw him a couple years ago at the Nilsson tribute that I was a part of. And the Acetones, we didn't make a record. We made demos, but we played like Lectosternium and the Zombie Zoo, and I think we played the Anti Club, places like that.
Yeah.
And then I sort of took a little bit of a break from live music and focused on was in junior college, and was sort of not knowing what I wanted to do. I was sort of in a place where I was trying to figure out, like, I really struggled with, like, what should my major be? Everybody I know that has an English degree works in a record store, so what's the point of continuing on college? It was sort of like a wilderness period for me, kind of early on.
You would really never know it because you've become such an eloquent writer.
Oh,
and very, your vocabulary is certainly impressive enough. So, yeah. Who needs school when you can do it on your own?
Most of what I've done is self-taught. I mean, graphics I did go to art school. I took art in high school and things like that, but I'm not formally trained in that area. So
now with these early bands, Steve, what instrument were you playing? You said you started on drums, but what were you doing in these bands?
In the first band, I was primarily a singer. In the second band, I was exclusively the singer of the group. They had their own material, and I would try and sing over their music. It was so loud I could never hear myself. So to this day, I think I have a little bit of hearing loss. I've got a little bit of hearing loss here, and I attribute that to the Acetones.
So it's really hard to imagine you trying to sing over music because you're such a smooth crooner. In the now people.
That was something that I had no interest in at that time. I liked loud music. I was a younger person. I had different tastes, and so when my friend Heath, who was he was not an exchange student, but he was an Australian who was living in Los Angeles with his family. His dad was sort of a famous news broadcaster in Australia, and he got a copy of Pet Sounds. And that was in like maybe 1989 or something like that. And I remember seeing it at his place, and we were listening to like lots of other stuff that was nowhere near Pet Sounds. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I know the Beach Boys, I know their hits, but this album is like an album that's sort of heavily revered by music fans in a different way than I had ever attributed to the Beach Boys. I didn't think of them in this heavy light, and I don't think a lot of people did at that time. And then after I heard that album, I wanted to hear every album that it ever influenced, basically. So that probably includes every single record behind David. So it was definitely like a musical epiphany to hear that record for the first time.
Wow, man.
And did that inspire you to form a soft pop band?
I don't know if I would necessarily label us as soft pop per se. I think we were just a distillation of all of our experiences and influences. But I think a lot of harmonies came into play, and major 7, major 9 chords, a lot of the things that you would hear in Pet Sounds, or a record that was influenced by Pet Sounds.
We're talking about the Now people now.
Now people, yeah.
Right.
Forever Changes was also a huge record for me. My friend Matt Severide in high school, whose dad was, or grandfather, I think, was Eric Severide.
Oh, wow.
News broadcaster.
Yeah.
Wow, yeah.
And he had a copy of Forever Changes. And that was, I just remember listening to that. And like, I can't believe that this record exists. And I didn't know about it. Like, how could a record this good not be like on everyone's shelves, but such is the case with so many records, like the record that you have on your t-shirt, David, so many records never got to. Yeah.
For anyone listening, if you're a fan of late 60s Baroque pop, if you're a Zombies fan, maybe a little Donovan, any soft pop, Give Me, Take You is one of the iconic albums in the genre. Didn't sell at all when it came out, but like a lot of fine art, it came of age well after its time. You really need to find this album. Fortunately, it's been reissued many times, so at least on CD, it's pretty easy. An original LP that I'm trying to find an original UK LP, and there's one up on Discogs for like $1,800 now. So that should.
I worked on a deluxe edition of Forever Changes. I'm looking for it. It's somewhere in here. But,
now you're talking. Yeah. We're cross talk here. I've been talking about Duncan Brown, and you're still talking about Forever Changes. But
I'm sorry. I thought you pivoted back to that. Yeah, actually, I tried to work on Duncan Brown, but that was, I think, I forgot who. Big Beat or somebody else did a really nice reissue of it.
They did, yeah. Big Beat did, absolutely.
But yeah. So
if any of our UK watchers, have the Duncan Brown album, just that they don't want, they can just send it David's way, right, David?
Well, if you have an original, pressing on immediate, by all means.
It's not worth anything. Just send it to David. He'll take care of it. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's the UK one that's really hard to find, right?
Yes. Yeah, the US one is, it's not pocket change. It's like $100 or so for a US one in good shape. But the UK one, forget it.
Now, Steve, when you were forming the Now people, I don't know what your age is. If you're a bit younger than me, when was this? What years were this?
1970. The year 1970 AD is when I was born.
You were born in 70, so you're talking
a slow news day. I actually looked it up recently, and Chappaquiddick still in the news. Kent State happened just a few weeks earlier, and Harriet Hadden Atwood. Do you know who she is?
No.
She was the very first recording artist. She actually played the piano on Edison's. The very first recording artist.
Oh, wow. There's a trivia.
First musical cylinder, not the Mary Had a Little Lamb one, but the one where he actually recorded a piano player. And so she passed away just a few hours before I was born.
Well, see, there you go. You the lineage had to continue.
There you go. All right, so that you're talking mid 90s then?
Mid 90s when I started playing music. Sort of a precursor to that was I was again an important person in my life, Matt Greenwald, who is no longer with us, sadly. He and I started writing songs together, and we came up with this clever idea that if we got jobs in the music business, we could get our songs placed on albums.
Of course, yeah.
Which was a very clever idea. So I ended up getting. I heard he told me about a job at a record distributor called Navarre Corporation. So I go there in my 1960 Chevrolet Biscayne two-door, show up, do the interview, and I just completely hit it off with the two managers, the West Coast managers of the company. And they walked me out to my car, and they were like, "Oh my God, they just loved this car." So like, we were going to hire you anyway, but your car seals the deal. So
Nice.
It was a done deal basically, and
maybe that's how Rodney got his job because they saw his BPO. Right?
Well, he probably had it back when it was new. This was a 35-year-old car at that point. But Navarre Corporation had like the Beach Boys without Brian Wilson. They had the Commodores without Lionel Richie. They had Gene Loves Jezebel without anyone named Gene or Jezebel in the group. And but the job afforded me to be able to go to record stores and for a living. It was a total dream job when you're 25 years old.
Wow. Yeah.
So I kind of like tooled around Southern California and Phoenix and Vegas in that old car selling their product, and it was a great experience. Wow. It really was. And it did not get any of my songs placed on albums. Nor Matt's efforts did not get his songs placed on albums either. But that was the reason how I got into the music business per se.
Yeah.
So.
Well, what about the band? Which was called, I assume was the first name of the band was Single Bullet Theory, unless there was one prior. How did you form?
Well, let's see. I have to go back to 1991. It was the last day of 1991. Some friends of mine went to the old Crush Bar in Hollywood, which would, on New Year's Eve and on other days of the week, they would play a lot of like old ska and Motown stuff. And it was kind of just a fun place to go if you didn't have anything else to do. And so my friend Justin and a few other people, I went down there and I met, just by chance, I met a guy by the name of Alan Brownstein, who I called, his nickname is Ruby. So right there and then we sort of shared similar musical influences and interests. So we just decided kind of on the spot to start a group at that point. So in 1992, we started getting the band going and playing all sorts of like dives around LA, like Kavanaugh's and Van Nuys Boulevard, places that no longer exist, like Anastasia's Asylum. We played a country bar in the Valley with a bunch of like grunge bands, at that time. And again, I don't want to be cliche because I know that every guest on your show probably says this, but this was before the internet. So, I had no idea that there were other musicians out there that had similar interests in music that I had. I thought the whole world was that really horrible band next to you in that rehearsal studio that just sounds like the whole time. I didn't know that there were other bands out there that actually focus on melody and harmony and songwriting, really. So that was the origin of that group. And my friend Dave Provost, who was a great guy, he was in the Dream Syndicate. He warned me that there was another band called Single Bullet Theory. But at the time I was like, well, who cares? Nobody knows who they are, so we'll just use the name. So we just continued using the name, and people sometimes thought we were the old band because they didn't know what the old band looked like, so it was kind of a funny
it's cool
comedy of errors.
So Alan Brownstein had the nickname of Ruby prior to this wasn't.
No, that was a nickname we gave him.
Oh, okay.
To sort of go along with our sort of JFK motif for the band,
So did everyone in the band have a nickname?
No. Although they just called me Stanley. It was kind of like they called me Stanley, not Steve. I don't know why, but yeah, no, he was the only one that had. He still, some of his friends still call him that to this day.
No, I know I do. That's the only way I've really known him.
And I can't give him enough praise because he's just a great guy and he's the mastering engineer on almost every release on Now Sounds.
Wow. Cool.
And IPO CD as well.
And the IPO CD as well. Yes. Extremely talented guy. Works a lot now in the area of applications for the cell phone. He does a lot of audio work in that world. So,
well, yeah, Single Bullet Theory played some of the early IPOs, and by the late '90s, you were you were playing some really good venues. I mean, you were playing Spaceland and Alligator Lounge and places like that. And then you changed the name to the Now People. And during this time, of course, you must be honing your soft pop craft and learning so much about all these releases, because it did seem to be the center of your existence in a very good way.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I guess I could attribute to the experience of hearing Forever Changes and Pet Sounds early on, and just wanting to basically hear every record that those albums either influenced or sounded like, and more in the area of sounded like. I've never been a super obsessive of 80s Paisley Underground or bands from that era trying to emulate the 60s. I tend to sort of focus more on the original era. So I had sort of another musical epiphany. Was one day, I've told this many times, but my girlfriend's best friend's dad's ex-wife, that's kind of confusing, right? She was throwing away her husband's records in the trash.
Oh, wow.
And he wrote one of the biggest songs of the 80s. And I'm not going to say what the song is. And if you know, maybe David, you know the story.
I don't actually, but go ahead.
But so this guy, he had sort of an interesting record collection, a lot of sort of arena rock stuff from the 70s, some acetates. But the most interesting thing was this sort of oblique op art album cover with like a little sort of what looked like a house or like a church of some kind in the background. And I turned the record over, and basically his wife was like, "You can have any of these records. I'm going to throw them away." Oh. And so these guys are like, they look really groovy. It's like late 60s Columbia records. And I thought, this is really kind of interesting. They're not trying to be overtly psychedelic, but they're not like hippies either. Like, it's sort of an in-between period after like the Paisley psychedelic era, but before the denim and the body odor and everything sort of like destroys the dandy era of the 60s, So I'm like, I got to take this record home. It was called Millennium, the Millennium Begin by the Millennium. And I think I didn't turn the record over for like a month because it just completely blew my mind. It was one of the most unbelievable records I'd ever heard at that time. And this is probably about 1995. And I did not know that there was a resurgence already in place with Don Eden and other people sort of re-examining this record. It had been reissued at this point. I did not know that. So it was a musical epiphany. And again, I had to find every record that sounded like that record or that had anything to do with the players on that record, Kurt Betcher, Gary Usher, those people. So does that answer your question? Great. You asked this question like 20 minutes ago, so I'm not sure if...
that's what's so interesting is just how things begat other things. And David and I are probably the exact same boat. You hear something that just takes complete control over everything, and you need to find out who they were influenced by or who they sound like or what else did these people record, and you get obsessive with like what else is going to sound like this or what else,
yeah.
And I get it. I mean, I totally get it.
Oh yeah.
Even even today, it's a passion. It's a passion.
So in the late 90s, you start working at Delphi Records for Bob Keane, and
the Bob Keane story. Where do we begin?
This is a side issue. Delphi released the first two IPO CDs, and that was in large part because of Steve and the aforementioned Elliot Kendall, who also worked there. They kind of brought the whole concept to Delphi, and fortunately, it was accepted. But
I'm trying to find a specific album here of Bob's. Here it is. Is that it? Okay, here we go.
The notorious Bob Keane, for sure.
Yeah. There we go. Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
Richie Valens. Bob Keane was a very fascinating man. I know that you met him, David. He was a big band leader in the 40s. He was sort of dubbed the youngest big band leader then. He was born in the early 20s. I think that he was in the war briefly, I believe. And he discovered Sam Cooke. And that was his sort of first entrance into the music business, although he was burned very quickly after that discovery and did not partake in any of the spoils of Sam Cooke's career. He found the song "You Send Me," basically.
Wow, okay.
And he found the recording of "You Send Me," which Bumps Blackwell had produced with Sam. So he had Delphi going. He put out a lot of surf records. Johnny Crawford. He discovered Barry White.
Yes.
Frank Zappa was one of his early signings. Bobby Fuller, which we'll get to later. And he revamped his label in the 90s. And he had a number of distributors, and then eventually landed upon Navarre Corporation, where I had been working. And I did some promotions with Delphi product at Virgin on Sunset, because when I was working at Navarre, I had like Virgin Sunset and Tower Sunset, and I had later on I had the Warehouse chain, and I had like a lot of irons and a lot of fires at that point. So Bob was very happy with the promotion that we did at Virgin, so he kind of headhunted me to be his new sales manager. So I was 28 at the time, and I was like, wow, it was the only label that Navarre had that I liked, basically. Everything else was like new age and techno house, and like, just as I was mentioning earlier, it was sort of it was a great entrance into the business, but it did not really have a lot of interest for me in terms of their product. Yeah. So I took Bob up on his offer, and it was frustrating in a lot of ways. He was a kind of a difficult man in some ways, but he was also a great guy and very funny. And he had so many incredible stories that, it was an opportunity I couldn't turn down.
Yeah, for sure. I wouldn't have. What's one most salient thing that you bring from that experience?
When the student is ready, the master appears. That was one of Bob Keane's. I know it's an old Buddhist proverb, but it's something that he used to say quite a lot. And it's sort of like, when you're ready to take on something, when you're ready to learn, it will happen for you. So it was he had sort of good spiritual qualities like that. He also had kind of uncool aspects to his personality, which we don't really need to go into here. I think other people could go into it in greater detail than I could, i.e. some of his recording artists. But one of the things that I learned while I was working at Delphi was that he wanted graphics done for specific things that we did, not necessarily CDs, but sort of like promotional, faxes and flyers that we would make. So he got me a very early version of Photoshop. So I sort of like, part of my job description became sort of like auxiliary graphics guy, so I started learning that stuff. And started producing. He even gave me the opportunity to produce reissues towards the sort of tail end of when I was working there. And I got to work on one of my favorite projects of my entire career, which is this record right here. I don't know if you remember this one, but my girl groups.
Yep.
When people think of Delphi Records, they don't tend to think of girl group bands. They think of Surf Stuff or Valens or Fuller, but he recorded like Brenda Holloway really early on. East LA group called the Sisters, who had local hits here. And Mary Sorry, who actually recorded a long lost Barry White song, which is on this CD. And I remember trying to reach Barry for the liner notes. I was also starting to write liner notes around this time. And I tried to call Barry. I reached his attorney, and, was like, could you please let me talk to Barry? We've got this song that he wrote and recorded, but we don't know anything about it. And he was like, Steve, I would put you on with Barry. Barry's got too much on his plate right now. That's what he told me. So take that as you will. But,
I think by that time he'd actually lost quite a bit of weight, so it only has the one meaning.
He was the walrus of love, and he was too busy to talk about that song. But it's a fantastic song. And afterwards, go on.
I was going to say, so Delphi is really where you cut your teeth on how to do it, how to how to put together reissues and liner notes and the whole kit and caboodle.
I mean, for the first time, like I was like researching some of these artists, and I interviewed like Carol Kay for these notes, and I spoke to Jim Pewter, who wrote Bobby Fuller's first single for Donna Records. I met some interesting people, and I sort of became aware of how one would go about producing a reissue. I learned about the Musicians Union. I think Elliot tipped me off to that, because Elliot had these contracts for recording sessions that happened in LA through the Local 47. And it was fascinating because it sort of became like a window into how these records were made, who played on them, where were they recorded, what were the dates of the recordings, that kind of thing. So it was sort of like a great entrance into the world of reissues.
So did this lead you to Revola? Or how did Yes.
Yes. So, do I have any other? Let's see. We also did this Delphonic Sounds Today album.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if you remember this one, but this was this was a collection of Delphi songs tributed by other bands like Manor Astroman, Wondermints, Liquor Giants, Brian Jonestown Massacre, that kind of thing. So that was another thing that we all produced together. The whole office did that together around that time. But sort of around this time, like 98, 99, Joe Foster from Revola, or Creation Records at the time, came in to license some Delphi product. And, we just sort of hit it off. We had very similar interests in music and what we thought should be reissued. So none of the actual Delphi things I think he wanted to license came to fruition, but we stayed in touch. And he, a few months later, told me about this record that he was going to reissue by a group that I had been sort of fascinated with, called The Eternity's Children, which I don't know if you can see this here.
Yep.
Yeah. It's looking good.
They're a great sort of psychedelic pop group that recorded for Tower Records, not the Tower Records chain, but the Capitol subsidiary. Yeah. And I helped out with that. Don Eden wrote the liner notes. And then after that record, is around 2000 that I decided I'd been getting so into the graphics thing and to starting a new chapter. Delphi was not really where I thought I didn't think they were going to stick around much longer at that point. And so I just sort of thought, well, I should maybe try the new millennium. Let's try and do something different. So I left Delphi with no job and started working in the field of reissues. And I started working on the next reissue, which was the Chris Lucy album. This was an album by a singer-songwriter by the name of Bobby Jameson. And this was an alias that he recorded under. And it actually, there's such a long story with how this album came to be that I don't want to really go into it now. But this was the first record that I produced for Revola, where I did pretty much everything. I did the graphics, the liner notes, and the tape research, and the reissue production, I guess, is what they would call it. So worked on Revola Records for about the next 6 years and produced some of my favorite albums that I've ever heard. So there's just so many. There's like about 40 or 50 albums that I did while working for Revolt.
Wow. I mean, I knew you did a lot, but that's way more than I thought. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Was the Tiny Tim reissue on Revola?
No, I've actually worked on a few Tiny Tim records. The most recent of which was...
I'm just a Tiny Tim fan, so I had to get that in.
Yeah, I worked on... Where is it?
You didn't tiptoe around that one, did you?
I did not tiptoe around that one. Thank you, David. Very good. Oh, nice.
Did this fairly recently. Yeah. This is can you see that?
Beautiful, yeah.
Run Out Groove did a reissue of Tiny's Live in London album from late '68. So I worked on that. But for my label, For Now Sounds, I worked on a deluxe expanded mono edition of the Tiny Tim God Bless Tiny Tim album from 1968. Totally classic, brilliant album.
Yeah.
And then we did a complete singles collection from Tiny Tim from 1965 to 1970. So
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something. I mean, that you don't talk to a whole lot of people walking down the street that have reissued Tiny Tim albums. It's just fantastic.
Well, you know,
here's the thing. I mean, you're able to do this stuff because of the advent of CDs. It enabled you to have 28 tracks on one disc, especially yes. 28 tracks from the 60s. They would fit, and if you needed more, you know, you could do 2 or 3 discs. You know, I bring this up because there's so many vinyl snobs out there who refuse to even consider a CD as a viable entity, and you know. What they're forgetting is that if it wasn't for that, so many of the reissues that you were able to do, both for Revola and Now Sounds, they never would have been able to exist. It would have been too cost prohibitive, and yeah, the whole thing. So I just wanted to get that in there.
Well, thank you. You know, I mean, it was sort of a golden time for reissues, wasn't it? You know, it was.
Yes.
It was a time when people still. I mean, Napster was around, but people were still buying musical product for the express purpose of listening to music, whereas now musical product has been fetishized and is something that I think a lot of people just put on their shelves and they don't really spin or you know use in a mechanical sense. But yeah, it was great. I wish I had gotten involved like a decade earlier. You know, my friend Andrew Sandoval, who does a lot of similar work that I did, started when he was like 20 years old, and how great for him that he started at that. That was a really golden time for records and record making, because that's when you could like go into vaults and you didn't have to have a million authorizations from every single area of the company. I mean, it's so complicated to make reissues these days. You know, it's just.
I know that's been a major frustration. You know, Steve, for the audience out there, Steve and I would talk often about, and I would come to him as a fan and say, you know, you really ought to do this album or this one. And he would agree, but he'd say, you know, I just can't get the license for it.
That was going to be kind of my next follow-up question. Where's the biggest roadblocks as far as you're concerned, reissue-wise, in licensing? Where have you had really tough times? How have you gotten around it? Do you have any insight along that concern?
Well, I'd like to, before I get to that, I'd like to add to David's comment that David was such a wonderful musical. What's the word? I mean, he just turned me on to
the word.
Huh?
Savant.
You know, yeah, he just turned me on to so many great records in the late 90s, and you know, just so many great memories of when I was back working at Navarre. I would always take the David Bash cassettes with me to Phoenix or to Las Vegas, and the rental cars back then would still have cassette players, and I was never without like great compilation tapes that you made, David. So thank you for that.
Nice.
It was always a pleasure to find somebody who was really into it as much as you.
I still have them, and I still have a cassette player in my old Cadillac. So sometimes I'll pull them out and play some of your old tapes. But I think we could almost spend a whole hour long show on the complexities of contemporary music reissue production and legal hurdles and frustrations. You know, obviously the majors are the worst, and they get worse. Capitol was complicated. Excuse me, I need to clear my throat.
I know it's emotional.
Yeah. Capitol was bad in the 2000s. I have a frog in my throat for some reason.
That's okay.
This is one froggy evening.
But Capitol got absorbed by Universal, which made it even worse.
Yeah.
So, I've had like records like here. I'll give you an example. This album by Paul Parrish, produced by Clay McMurray, which was he was actually a Motown producer in the late 60s. And he produced this very folky, Donovan-y kind of psychedelic pop record. And it took me 4 years between the time I wrote the license request for this record and the time that I actually held this CD in my hand. And it's all because the majors make so little on records that sell 1,500, 2,000 copies that's the last thing on their agenda, that they will, bother to go through the process of looking up the contracts and making sure that they own things. And so that, that's an extreme example, but it's not uncommon for a record to take a couple years to clear, or to not clear, to be denied. You might take 3 years to learn that they've denied a record, and they won't give you a reason why.
Yep.
You tend to sort of get the conclusion that perhaps they weren't able to find the contracts. So at that point, you can pursue the license directly with the artist if they're still around. But the unfortunate thing about that option is that you won't be able to access the master tapes. And in the case of Universal, to add even another layer of frustration, is that they had a huge fire, which was very heavily reported. Only a couple years ago, that news about the fire was made publicly aware, but it actually happened in the mid 2000s. So it's kind of boring.
I know.
That's doubly frustrating, I'm sure, because one of the biggest differences between what you did with Rivola and what you're doing and have done with Now Sounds is with Now Sounds you've had total control, and you've gone to painstaking efforts to make sure you got tape for anything for which tape was available. And obviously with Universal now, that that's been kiboshed because of the fire, unfortunately. And but man, some of the stuff you've gotten tape for, nobody else would have gone to that effort. Staccato's albums, for example. I mean, that's just amazing.
Yeah, where's that one? That one's over here somewhere. The Staccato's was great. That was David's referring to a band that later became the 5-man electrical band. And that's this one right here. Again, this is a record that I think I found at the Pasadena City College swap meet for like $5 in the mid 90s. And never at that time, I was a waiter. I think, that was probably around the time that I started Navarre. But never would I ever dreamed that I would be able to work on a reissue of a record like this. I don't think that I ever thought that records had an audience beyond, me and a few enthusiastic people in Japan. I mean, I didn't think that there were a couple 3,000 people out there that would care about something like that. But it was a great experience. And like I say, we put out so many, and the thing that I always focused on was getting master tape, because it was my logic that at that time anybody could just rip their vinyl album and just make a CDR of it and put it out there in the universe. But to get the master tape, unfortunately, that was a kind of a golden time for bootlegs and that kind of thing. But I back then, it wasn't that expensive to get a tape copy of an album. You know, it'd be like maybe $150, $300, maybe $400. I got a quote. This was a while ago, but I got a quote from Universal for like, I think it was like $1,500 to transfer a 30-minute album. You know,
Wow.
we're talking, you know, $1,500 to transfer, like, and it just seems absurd to me. You know, it's probably more than that now. You know.
Oh yeah.
We had a great question come in though, Steve. Someone wanted to know
Here it is again,
what your dream reissue would be to produce. Do you have something that you that wakes you up at 3 o'clock in the morning in cold sweat?
Well, I don't usually like to give my secrets away on live television, you know.
Okay, good one. Good
I will mention something that is impossible to do now, and if someone were able to do it and go into a time machine and make it happen, all the more power to them. But a few years back, Motown Records got a really amazing treatment with their year-by-year reissues, single reissues. They're beautiful book-bound boxed sets. By the way, that's boxed, B-O-X-E-D. Just to let you know. We could have a debate about that, but
yes, we could.
I always thought that A&M deserved that treatment. You know, the year-by-year A&M Records singles, box sets done in the Motown style would be great, but unfortunately, the aforementioned fire probably makes that an impossibility. So that would be my dream project, to do something like that.
Wow.
Tell us about the Beau Brummels one coming up. Because we're getting near the witching hour, and we certainly want to promote that.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say, my fond wishes to Mulligan's family. Deck of the Beau Brummels just passed away a couple days ago. He was the original guitar player and played other instruments as well. And he unfortunately is not going to be able to see our box set. But we have an 8-disc set coming out, which was actually produced by my friend Alec Palau. He did everything on the set, wrote the notes, did all the tape research, and found all the images. So it's a wonderful collection that I got to do the design work for and put out on Now Sound. So I'm very happy about that. I wish I could show it to you, but I don't have it yet. It should be out actually out like today or tomorrow. So
wow.
Cool. Let's hope so. We've been waiting, and you and Alec together—that's like a dream team, really. You know, Alec has done all those great Ace reissues, and both of you.
We worked on quite a lot of things. We worked on this collection. I don't know if you saw this.
Oh yeah, double
whammy, which was basically it's applying the Nuggets principle to the Concord family of labels. And what else? With Andrew, we did this collection, the Beau Brummels, which did well. I think it made Rolling Stone's top 10 reissues when it came out. And there's just so much. Like, we didn't even really go into like all the design work I do for stuff that I don't produce, but maybe we can here's
the beauty of it, Steve. We can always, because someone was asking up here in a comment about, can we do a part 2 with Steve? And we can always do a part 2, which I'd love to do, because we haven't even scratched the surface of your design work. So
one of the things I'm most proud of was I got to work on the Rolling Stones reissue of the Rock and Roll Circus. That was the again, you know, a kid growing up listening to my mother's copy of Got Live If You Want It, maybe the worst sounding live record of all time. Like, never would have dreamed of working on a Rolling Stones reissue. So I'm a very fortunate person. And
you're also
I should also say that. Oh, pardon me.
You're also a very modest one. I mean, your resume is just, not just with Now Sounds, but all the things that you've done and all the things that you've taught yourself to do. It's incredibly impressive.
Thank you. Well, Now Sounds wouldn't exist if it wasn't for my wife, Cheryl, and her encouraging me to start my own label. You know, I'd been working on the Rivola stuff for a number of years at that point, and had some other ideas about doing some other things, and she was the guiding force that really kind of pushed me in that direction. So she's very inspirational to me.
Yeah, well, yeah, Cheryl's great, and we'll say
she's a 3-time Grammy nominee in her own right. She produced one of my favorite box sets, the Girl Group box set, the box set on Rhino Records. So
the one with a great pillbox hat cover. Yeah, and not only that, but she taught you Yiddish. So we would have expected a child from Oklahoma City would be speaking Yiddish now, but here you go.
I guess it was Beshert, right? Yeah.
Well, you know, Steve, if they ever do a movie on you, and I would love to see that, they ought to get Paul Rudd to play you. Every time I watch him, when he's doing one of his sort of just affable characters, I think, God, he reminds me of Steve so much.
I've gotten that comparison. Also, the governor from that TV show. What was that TV show called? It was called The Governor. I've been told I look like that guy.
Well, they can always get the Arby's guy if it's unavailable.
That was truly surreal, actually. Mark, I don't think you knew this, but there was Arby's commercials like around the early 2000s, and this guy, like, I swear to God, it was like I was looking in the mirror. This guy, I don't know who he is, but
You never did get a hold of him?
I never figured out what his name was. I just don't know who it.
Well, he's in the queue right now. We're going to bring him onto the show. Here he is, the Arby's guy. No, he's not here.
Well, Steve, this was so much fun. And as Mark said, you know, we haven't scratched the surface. Well, we scratched it a little bit, but we haven't itched the whole back. So,
I was going to mention another thing. This was something I was pretty happy that I worked on recently. For Rivola.
Thank you, Andy.
I worked on a couple of white whale collections. Actually, quite a number of white whale collections. And Andrew Sandoval was like wanting to do a collection of his own. We worked on it together and had a great time, and that was a fun project. So we can go into all sorts of other projects at a later date. You know,
we'd certainly welcome a part 2.
Would definitely love that. Would definitely love that. You know, only the really good guests get part 2.
That's right.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean those who didn't get part 2 or weren't good guests.
No, they were all terrible.
You know.
And we understand. But it's all good. Steve, I'll have to drop you a note offline one of these next couple of days, because I'd love to pick your brain on reissue scenarios, especially when it comes to Universal and master tapes and things like that no longer exist. So we'll talk about that offline.
It's always fun. Yeah. It's always fun. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, we'll have that conversation. Yeah, I hope I won't discourage you from doing anything, but yeah.
Cool. All right, Steve. Well, thanks so much again, have a great rest of the day. And you and I will be speaking soon, of course.
Absolutely.
More IPO graphics coming up.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, David.
Have a great night. Nice talking to you, Steve. Be healthy.
Talking to both of you. Yeah. Take care.
You too.
All right, my friend. That was Steve Stanley. Now Sounds. What a fantastic show. That was really informative, to say the least. And again, we didn't get to scratch the whole back. So,
well, you see, this is what happens, and I didn't even take my own advice, which was don't start at the beginning of somebody's life if you only have an hour to interview them. And we're not pros, and we don't have. We don't have our shoulders looked over by, engineers and producers saying, time to, got to cut to commercial. Stop talking about this. We'll let the guests go on, and it's very interesting.
Yeah,
I think that's a luxury that a lot of interviewers don't have, and I'm glad we do. But of course, the other side of that is we end up having to do part 2s. So.
Yeah,
we will.
Indeed.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Andy. Appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening, as always.
Indeed.
Listening and watching.
So what do we got? What do we got coming up, David? Next Wednesday.
Well, next Wednesday, again, as I always say, just hold on to your seats, folks. Next Wednesday is going to be beyond outrageous, I'm sure. We have the irrepressible, precocious Mr. Robbie Rist on next week. I mean, the amount of stories you want to talk about in an hour, he could talk about his first year on Earth in an hour, probably. Let alone everything else that he's done. I mean,
indeed.
Wow. After that, we have the gentleman from a band that obviously I know you love, the Head Boys. One of the main men, Mr. George Boyder, Scott of the Scottish band, as I said, the Head Boys. You're going to be reissuing something for them, aren't you?
Well, I'm going to try. That's part of the struggle, and that's what I'd like to talk to a guy like Steve about. I've been trying for 10 years on this one, but we did put out the Lost album, but it's that one and done album that we're going to talk to George about, that everybody has been asking for, and it's tough, but sometimes it's worth it,
Oh, I think once you have it in your hand, no matter what blood, sweat, and tears you go through, it will be worth it. And then the week after, November 24th, I know one of your favorite bands from the 70s, and I love this band a whole lot too, Starry Eyed and Laughing.
Yep.
They put out 2 records on CBS back then that were just brilliantly sparkling, birdsy influence. And of course, being from the UK, they had that going for it as well. So it was a great combination of stuff. They're still going strong. In fact, they had an album just come out maybe a month or 2 ago. And the band we're talking about is Starry Eyed and Laughing. And we are going to have their main singer-songwriter, Mr. Tony Poole, as our guest on the 24th.
Awesome.
And, that should be great also. So after that, we still have irons in the fire. We'll keep you apprised as we solidify guests. And, of course, Mark and I can always talk if we have to. That's certainly never a problem.
Never a problem. It's all good.
Hopefully I'll get my mental acuity back, because I'm still very fuzzy, but I'm sure in time.
It'll come, my friend. It'll come.
Yeah. It will. But anyway, this was great as always. And we look forward to next week. And
we'll see everybody next week. Material Issues Wednesday. Remember, tell your friends. Let them know that they can join the Facebook group. They'll always be notified of when the live shows are coming up. And you can check out the archives on the Facebook group, Material Issues, YouTube/Material Issues archives, and live.
Don't be shy about commenting. I know that some people are reluctant because they think it's going to interrupt the flow of the show. We may not address your comment as we see it, but if it's a question, especially for our guest, we'll get to it when the flow works for that. So don't be shy. We welcome it very, very much.
That's right. Yeah. All right, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday evening. We'll see you back here. Same Material Issues time, same Material Issues station.
Thank you, Mark. Thank everybody else. Be good. Stay safe. We'll see you
next
next
time. Have a great
time.
night. Good night.